Most women never realize the power they hold until they leave. Have you ever wondered why a man becomes his most introspective, most tormented, most alive self the moment you walk away? Why he suddenly starts chasing ghosts and questioning his reality when it's far too late? It's not your absence, he mourns. It's the mirror you shattered, the one that kept his ego intact, the one that kept his shadow asleep. Because when you leave, truly, leave not in manipulation, not in silent threat, but in the quiet, resolute stillness of self-worth. Something ancient stirs inside him. You were never just a woman. You were the projection screen for his soul. You carried the feminine archetype he couldn't name but always needed. He saw in you the anima, the inner feminine he lost long ago, soft yet unyielding, nurturing yet untamed. And when you withdraw that reflection, he doesn't just lose you, he loses himself, Carl Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most men walk through life ruled by shadows. They never confront wounds, inherited guilt, suppressed inadequacies masked behind bravado. And then you arrive, not as salvation, but as disruption. You ignite a war between the man he pretends to be and the man he truly is. At first he may idolize you, pedestalize you. He'll drink the image of your beauty and mystery like a dying man in a desert. But this is not love. This is hunger. His unconscious believes you can complete what's fractured inside him. He doesn't yet know the weight of his own shadow, the rage buried beneath years of silence, the fear crouched behind his pride. And when you start to see it, when your gaze becomes a threat, not a sanctuary, he recoils. He'll accuse you of being too much, too emotional, too cold, too demanding. Not because you are, but because your presence illuminates the parts of him he swore he buried. But you didn't come to mother a wounded boy. You didn't come to be an emotional hospice. You came to meet, to merge, to be seen. And when he refuses, when he runs from the mirror instead of stepping through it, your silence becomes sacred. Your absence becomes alchemical. That's when his shadow awakens. He feels it first in dreams, the haunted ones, where he's chasing someone he can never reach. Then in stillness, when your laugh echoes in empty rooms. And eventually in panic, the existential kind, the unraveling, because you are no longer his balm. You are now the trigger. You became the voice he can't unhear, the memory that asks him, "Who are you without your armor?" You were the feminine force that shattered his illusion of control. And he will either rise or retreat. Some will demonize you. That's easier than confronting the truth. They'll say you changed, became distant, lost your softness. But softness without respect is not love, it's surrender. And you didn't come here to lose yourself. You came here to become whole. He may reach out, not to reconnect, but to re-anchor his ego, to see if he still has access to the old version of you, the forgiving one, the one who shrunk herself to keep him calm, the one who bled quietly so he wouldn't feel threatened by your depth. But she's gone now. The woman he once knew was born from trauma and appeasement. The woman you are now walks with the fire of self-trust and the silence of someone who no longer begs to be understood. And that silence terrifies him. Because men aren't afraid of your rage, they're afraid of your indifference. When you stop explaining, stop rescuing, stop showing up to defend the love you gave freely, he meets the truth. He was never in love with you. He was in love with the way you softened his shame. And now shame stands naked in the mirror, staring back at him with your absence. So let him face it. Do not chase the man who recoils from your depth. Do not dilute your light for someone who finds truth too bright. You are not here to teach him how to love. You are here to embody what self-respect looks like in a world addicted to validation. And in that embodiment, you do more than walk away. You awaken the part of him that could have grown but chose silence. You become the storm that shook his foundation, the dream he will chase in every woman who follows. But no one else will ever reflect him like you did. He will search for you in smiles that don't reach his soul, in bodies that mimic your curves but lack your fire, in conversations that echo with laughter but are void of meaning. He will chase you not for love, but for the reflection he can no longer find within himself. Because once a man has glimpsed the truth through the eyes of a conscious woman, no counterfeit will ever satisfy. And still, he may never admit it. Pride is a fortress built on the bones of missed opportunities. To confess your impact would mean acknowledging the depth he denied. So instead, he becomes a prisoner of his own image, holding tight to the illusion that you were just another chapter. But you weren't a chapter. You were the turning point. Because you didn't just walk away. You withdrew your energy. You reclaimed your emotional labor. You stopped offering him the sacred space of your presence, and that was the true loss. For it is the feminine gaze, deep and intuitive, that sees into a man and invites his greatness to the surface. You didn't ask him to be more. You saw that he already was, and that scared him. Jung taught that every man carries within him the image of the woman, not the real woman, but her inner representation. This is the anima, and if undeveloped, the anima controls him in unconscious ways, drawing him toward chaos, addiction, or fantasy. But when a man confronts his anima, when he learns to integrate her into his psyche, he becomes whole. And that journey begins when you leave. You were never his completion. You were his mirror. And when you broke the illusion, when your footsteps echoed with certainty as you walked away, you cracked open the unconscious in him. The child, the coward, the king. They all awakened in the silence you left behind. He may spiral. He may dive into distractions, burying his grief beneath new faces and louder laughs. But none of it quiets the voice, the one that whispers in the night you lost something rare. Not because you didn't love her, but because you didn't love yourself enough to rise to meet her. This is where the real alchemy happens, not in the relationship, but in the rupture. The break is the crucible. It forces him inward, to the abyss, to the reckoning. He may avoid it. He may blame you. But if he is brave, if there's even a flicker of light within his soul, he will stop running. He will sit with the emptiness, feel the weight of the woman he pushed away, and begin the descent into himself. And what of you? You do not wait. You do not check his shadow's progress. You move. You rise. You expand into the fullness of your being. Because the moment you stopped trying to be his answer, you became your own. And this is the wound that haunts him most, not your departure, but your evolution. Because he expected you to crumble, he expected regret. Instead, you became fire, poise, precision. You became the embodiment of what happens when a woman chooses self-respect over attachment. And the world felt it. Your glow returned. Not because he chased you, but because you stopped dimming yourself for someone who feared your light. And as you moved forward, life began to rearrange itself in your favor. The doors that once stayed closed began to creak open. New connections blossomed not out of desperation, but from a place of sacred alignment. You no longer looked for someone to save you. You became your own anchor. This is the paradox he cannot escape. He lost you when he refused to look inward, when he chose comfort over growth, when he mistook your emotional depth for drama, your silence for weakness, your love for a given, not a gift. And by the time he understands, you are already gone, not just physically, but energetically. You no longer orbit his world. You are a galaxy unto yourself. So let him sit with the shadow. Let him hear your name in every storm and feel your echo in the spaces where truth cannot be silenced. Let him awaken. Some men awaken through pain, others awaken through loss. But the rarest transformation occurs when a man is brought to his knees, not by life's tragedies, but by a woman's silence that he once took for granted. And this silence, your silence, is not cold. It is sacred. It is the sound of the feminine reclaiming herself from the battlefield of validation. No more shrinking. No more explaining. No more bleeding out just to be seen. You once offered him sanctuary, a place where he could unravel without shame, speak without judgment, collapse without ridicule. And yet, instead of honoring that temple, he desecrated it with his fear, his avoidance, his refusal to meet himself through your reflection. But the feminine cannot be imprisoned without consequence. The moment a woman begins to betray herself to maintain love, love dies. You knew it. He didn't. Until now. Now he feels the phantom of your presence. In the pause before sleep. In the eyes of another woman who doesn't look back with the same knowing. In the warmth that used to wait for him and now greets no one. He remembers not the moments, but the feeling. The way his chaos felt safe in your arms. The way your intuition exposed the truth before he could name it. He begins to wonder, who was I with her? But the better question is, who was I afraid to become? Because the woman who leaves is not always the woman who wanted to. Often she's the one who begged quietly, invisibly, with every compromise of her soul for him to see her. Not with his eyes, but with his essence. And when he wouldn't or couldn't, you chose something far more terrifying than heartbreak. You chose yourself. That is what marks the end of a karmic bond, when one stops repeating the pattern and walks away not in bitterness, but in wisdom. When the cycle of need and neglect, chase and retreat finally breaks and a new identity is born. He remains at the threshold. You have crossed it. And yet, something in him still stirs. Perhaps for the first time, he questions the story he told himself. That he was always the one in control. That you needed him. That emotional depth was weakness. That detachment was power. Now, in the echo of your absence, those myths collapse. This is where the masculine meets his reckoning. For without the feminine mirror, he must now face himself. Not the curated version, but the fragmented, bleeding, unclaimed self. The parts he locked away long before he met you. The wounds he inherited from generations of silence and stoicism. And what does he see? He sees the boy who learned that vulnerability is dangerous. The adolescent who equated control with safety. The man who confused love with possession and presence with dominance. He sees that you were never trying to change him, you were trying to reach him. That every time you asked for more, you were asking him to show up as his whole self, not just the persona. He realizes too late that the love you offered was not conditional, but it was sacred, and sacred things, when neglected, do not stay. And so you become myth, not a fantasy, but a lesson. He may speak of you with reverence or not at all. He may find words, or he may carry the regret like a stone lodged deep in his chest. But you will remain the woman who called his soul forward and refused to wait in silence while he stood at the door. Meanwhile, you no longer need his awakening to justify your leaving. You no longer ache to be understood by the very soul that denied your depth. You've entered a season of sovereignty, of becoming, where once you questioned your worth, you now guard it like a sacred flame. Where once you feared being alone, you now meet solitude like a temple. You are no longer half waiting for a version of him that may never come. And if he returns, it is not your role to redeem him. You are not the savior, you are the storm, the mirror, the quiet catalyst. He must walk his path alone, into the shadow, into the fire. Only then can he truly meet you if you still choose to be seen. There comes a moment after the fire when he begins to understand, not intellectually but viscerally. Deep in his bones, beneath the bravado and beneath the silence, a truth emerges like smoke from the ashes. You were the storm that he needed, but didn't know how to weather. And now he stands in the wreckage of what once was of the comfort, the familiarity, the rhythm of your presence, and realizes it wasn't your leaving that shattered him. It was what your absence revealed. The shallow friendships he kept to distract himself now feel hollow. The women he entertains seem like echoes, not encounters. The distractions work, gym nightlife have all dulled, revealing an unbearable quiet he cannot mute. Because nothing of this world fills the void left by a woman who once looked into his soul and chose herself instead. You see, for many men, growth only comes through confrontation. And nothing confronts like the void left by a woman who once offered light and then withdrew it. But here's the difference. You didn't walk away in anger. You walked away in clarity. And clarity is a force more powerful than vengeance, more permanent than tears. Because once you see someone as they truly are, beneath the promises, beneath the charm, you cannot unsee it. And he feels that. He senses that he can no longer enter your world the way he once did. The door is still there, but the lock has changed. Because the woman who begged, the woman who waited, the woman who pleaded, she died in the silence. What remains now is a sovereign being, a woman of deep knowing, no longer willing to be the emotional scaffolding for a man too afraid to face his own ruins. Jung wrote that only the wounded physician heals. But to heal, he must first acknowledge his own wound. Not just the ones others gave him, but the ones he inflicted on you, on himself, on every woman who tried to love the man still hiding in the boy. And yet, this is where the true journey begins, not in reunion, but in redemption, not in returning to what was, but in becoming what could have been if only he had seen it sooner. There are men who never recover from losing a woman like you, not because they can't move on, but because they know that they never truly showed up. They never took the risk of being seen. And so they spend the rest of their lives replaying moments, rewriting history, wishing for a second chance that the soul no longer grants. But sometimes, rarely, one of them will rise. He will stop pointing fingers and start digging graves for the parts of himself that resisted evolution. He will face his addictions not just to substances, but to control, to detachment, to the performance of masculinity. He will stare into the mirror and not look away. He will do the shadow work. He will trace back to the moment where love turned to fear, where presence turned to performance, where connection turned into conquest, and he will rebuild from nothing, from within, from the silence you left behind. And maybe one day he will meet someone new, but she will not be you, because you were not just a woman. You were a threshold. You were the awakening. And you are no longer the woman who needs to be chosen. You have chosen yourself 1,000 times in the quiet. You have met your own gaze in the mirror and no longer need it to be reflected in anyone else's eyes. You've embraced your wholeness. You've honored the ache. You've alchemized the loss into becoming. And now, you are free. Free from needing closure. Free from longing for apologies. Free from the idea that love requires suffering. You are not bitter. You are not hardened. You are awake. And that more than anything is what haunts the man you left behind, not your love, but your liberation. Because he didn't just lose a woman. He lost the version of himself that only existed in your light. There is a kind of woman who enters a man's life like a whisper, but leaves like a revelation. She does not beg to be understood, nor does she shout her worth into ears unwilling to listen. She simply becomes so whole that anything less than conscious love no longer holds power over her. And that is where you are now. No longer waiting for recognition. No longer auditioning for the role of the one who stayed. You've surrendered the story of being the healer, the fixer, the emotional contortionist who bends just enough not to break. That woman died the moment you realized your love could not substitute for his courage. And in her place, a force rose. You no longer define yourself through his response, because now you see what he could not, that the relationship was never just about love. It was about evolution, about whether he would choose to confront the war within himself or expect you to soothe it endlessly. He did not rise. He recoiled, and in doing so, he mistook your grace for permanence. He thought you would always be there waiting at the edge of his denial, holding space for his half-hearted efforts. But feminine energy, when fully awakened, does not wait. It flows. It transforms. It ascends. And you did. Because you understood the most painful truth of all, sometimes love is not enough. Not when it's given to someone who fears its depth. Not when it's used as a mirror for someone too blind to see what stands before him. So you stepped away. Not to punish, but to protect what remained of your sacred self. And in that act, you reclaimed every fragment of your intuition that he once made you question. Every time you swallowed your voice just to keep peace. Every moment you felt crazy for feeling deeply. Every time you made yourself smaller to soothe the tension. All of it you took back. And now he sees the crater you left behind. Not a wound, but a mark. A place once filled by someone who asked for nothing but truth and gave everything in return. But what he never understood is that your love was earned not by perfection, but by presence, by showing up, by choosing vulnerability over ego, growth over comfort, depth over detachment. And when he chose otherwise, the connection began to decay, not from betrayal, but from neglect. Not with a bang, but with 1,000 silences. And in one final silence, you disappeared. But your energy remains. In every woman he meets who doesn't hold space the way you did. In every night he stares at the ceiling, wondering what he could have said, what he could have been, if only he hadn't been so afraid to feel. Because that's what you gave him, a feeling. One he couldn't name, but one that lingers in his bones. The kind that makes music taste different. The kind that lingers in the air of old coffee shops and beneath the scent of certain perfumes. You became memory. You became myth, and he will either let that myth consume him or inspire him. He may one day return, not with promises, but with presence, not with rehearsed apologies, but with awareness, with eyes that have seen darkness and no longer fear the light, with a heart that no longer runs from its own beat. And if he does, it won't be the same man who watched you walk away. It will be a man who has met his shadow and befriended it, a man who has crawled through the abyss and emerged not whole, but honest. And still, you owe him nothing. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your body, only your truth. Because the woman you've become does not settle for potential. She honors presence. She does not confuse attention with devotion. She does not mistake longing for compatibility. She does not fall for men who fear her fire. She walks with those who match it. So if he rises, let it be for himself. Your journey is no longer about his transformation. It is about your liberation, your unfolding, your refusal to sacrifice your essence just to feel seen. And in that refusal, you become untouchable. You are no longer a chapter in his story. You are the mirror he cannot escape, the storm that woke his soul, the stillness that demanded reflection, the loss that taught him how to feel. You were never the wound. You were the medicine, and now you stand at the edge of a new beginning, not one marked by another man's gaze, but by your own reflection. The woman staring back at you is no longer waiting. She is no longer bleeding silently in the name of love, nor is she pretending that her softness is weakness. She knows now. She knows that the ache she once felt was not because she was unlovable, but because she tried to bloom in a place that feared her petals. She knows that her intensity is not too much. It's a fire meant to purify, not pacify. And she knows that what she offered was rare, not because of its drama, but because of its depth. And so she rises, not as a survivor, but as a creator. She doesn't need to reclaim what was lost, because she has become what was always hidden. She doesn't speak of revenge or regret. Those are the tools of the small and afraid. She speaks in the language of women who have loved and let go, not to forget, but to transcend. You are that woman now. You do not need a return. You do not crave an apology. You are not a page to be turned or a story to be rewritten. You are a force, a pulse, a rhythm the world cannot ignore. And whether he awakens fully or drowns in his echo, you continue, because your path no longer bends toward those who cannot meet your soul. Your path is carved by the sacred act of choosing yourself over comfort. It is lit by the fires you once feared would destroy you. Now you dance in those flames. You are not the woman who needs to be remembered. You are the woman who reminds. You remind others of what's possible when truth becomes your compass, when worth becomes your foundation, when silence becomes your sword. You remind the world that a woman who walks away doesn't vanish. She becomes legend. And if he ever meets you again, it won't be a reunion. It will be a reckoning. He will look into your eyes and realize he no longer knows the woman who once waited for him to become, because the girl who softened her voice to keep his peace now speaks with thunder. The lover who begged for depth now moves in oceans. The muse who once held his chaos like sacred scripture now worships only at the altar of her own becoming. And this is the great paradox. The more you release the need to be chosen, the more magnetic you become. Not to the wounded, not to the wanderers, but to those who have arrived, men who have met their own shadows and no longer flinch in the face of a woman who sees everything. You do not chase, you choose. And when you choose, it is not out of lack, it is out of alignment. You know what your love is worth. You know what it costs to betray yourself. And you will never again invest in a man who sees your depth as danger instead of destiny. So let him remember you. Let him feel the shape of your silence in the contours of his days. Let him wake in the middle of the night and feel a name caught between his ribs. Let him find pieces of you in songs, in shadows, in things that once felt ordinary. Let him grieve not your presence, but the version of himself that you called forth, and he refused to become. And you walk on, unbothered, undone, unafraid. You are not waiting for love. You are love, not the romantic kind, but the kind that rebuilds temples in ruins, the kind that chooses solitude over scraps, the kind that knows the woman who walks away in truth never really loses, because she does not seek to be the dream. She is the awakening. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.